I'm still here. We still here.
Okay, just to
I'm still here.
okay, fine. All right, let's get started. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה. וערב נא אדוני אלוהינו את דברי תורתך בפינו ובפי עמך בית ישראל, ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל, כולנו יודע שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה, ברוך אתה אדוני מלמד תורה לעמו ישראל.
אמן.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר בך באנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Amen.
Okay. That's obvious. Okay. That's on that head. All right, let's go to the Mishnah Brura. We're still on 178, section 4. And the the Mishnah Brura, we're on 178, section 42. And the Shulchan Aruch, 178, section 4. Okay. So, what we're dealing here is if you don't set up your meal in a fixed place, then there's no issue of a shinui makom, changing one's place. So the halachas of changing your place only apply when you first settle in your place, and then you move elsewhere. But if your whole eating was on the go, in other words, you were always on the way out, inverted commas, you're not considered as having ever fixed your first place, such as moving it would be a change of place, and therefore you do not make any new brachas. In other words, if you're eating on the go and you haven't started in a particular place with your initial intention finishing in that place, it's not considered moving place. Often what happens is you have an emergency call or you need to go somewhere, but you've already rested your mind that you're going to finish the meal in that place. But if you are on the go during the whole meal, there's no issue of shinui makom, changing your place, okay? So, for example, if you started eating fruit while standing to leave the house with intent to keep eating on the bus, this is in Israel when you're taking a bus, you do not make a new borei priya eitz on the bus. Or if you ordered a takeaway coffee from Kofix, for example, and made a brocha while standing and about to walk out and catch the train, you do not make another brocha. Or if you were standing in the line of a gate of an airport holding your carry-on luggage and you started drinking a Coca-Cola with intent to continue on the aeroplane, you do not need to make another brocha on the aeroplane. However, if you're known in this case as a traveler, for example, and you started in one place with intent to stay in that place and then moved to another place or began to travel at that point, you are subject to the previous rules because you did fix a meal in your mind in the first place. So in that case, you should ideally bench or do the brocha achrona in the first place that you are, and then if you have to go to a second place, then obviously you do the after brocha. So if you started eating meat in your office thinking that you would finish it before you have to leave, and then suddenly you have to leave, you must make a borei nefashot and a new shakol when you get into the car. Okay? Again, one last example. If you were in duty-free lounge with your bags down neatly, and then you began to relax to a coffee or soda, you'd need to make a new brocha achrona before you leave that place. Sorry, you make a brocha achrona before you leave that place, and then you make a new brocha on the aeroplane. Even though you knew you were going somewhere, you first settled yourself mentally into one place and then moved. All right? And this shares by Rabbi Daniel Brody and Rabbi Gary Brody's brother. Thanks, guys. I hope this is helpful, but every day we care covering the Mishnah Brura, so I think it is very helpful. All right. Now,
can I just mention something? Sorry, it's quite serious.
Yeah.
We might want to dedicate the show, I tell you to who. I don't know if you know him. There's a guy, Jack, who passed away this morning from Corona. What do you
mean he passed away?
He passed away from Corona.
Oh, my God.
You know who Jack is?
Of course.
He's the food guy. Yeah. I've got his Hebrew name.
Yes.
Yeah, he always battled to find work, and he was such a lovely guy, and he kept trying, and he got jobs here and there. And just a very lovely guy, absolute mensch. And he passed away this morning. He's been very ill. I've been saying tell him for him daily. There's been a group. I'll give you his Hebrew name because I think we should.
Yeah, I would have loved you to have given it to me before we did the.
Sorry, I apologize. Sorry, I'm a bit dazed there.
Okay, no.
Can I give it to you now?
Yeah, please. What is his Hebrew name?
Give it to you now. Yaakov ben Nacham.
Okay, so thank you, Gavin. We will dedicate this year to Yaakov ben Nacham. I know Jack very well. I don't know his surname, but I
also don't.
He's a lovely person. It's a bit of a
lovely.
He's young. He's relatively young. He's in his mid-40s.
No. He's early 40s, 41, 42.
This is hectic.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I'm a bit shocked. Okay.
Yeah, sorry with my timing. I apologize.
No, nothing wrong with your timing. You remember when you remember. I'm just a bit shocked. All right. So let me tell you where we ended off last time. So where we ended off was on 13b4. And there was an extra phrase which says the damager is obligated. Remember, if you were reading, according to Rav Chisda, he joined the fact that you're liable from the basically the second and third sentence by Rav Elazar, joined the first and the last sentence to say that you're not liable. So according to Rav Elazar, the damager is obligated, is left open. So now what we're going to do is we're going to interpret it. And we said according to Shmuel, it comes to include a case for Keren, because Keren wasn't discussed in the opening Mishnah because it's half damages. And according to Rav, that said under ox, under shore, he mentions Keren, Shane, and Regal. So in that case, he mentioned it. So we say, all right, so this fits well according to Shmuel, but it doesn't fit well according to Rav. So what does Rav want to talk about here in terms of what the damages obligated means? So he's saying like Rav Oshaya, in this case, which Rav Oshaya did mention in the first daf, as we discussed, in the second daf in the first Mishnah, that he's talking about a case of a shomer, a custodian. So they have 4 custodians. You've got an unpaid custodian, a borrower, a paid custodian, or a renter, in which an animal did damage on their particular premises. So what do we mean in their particular premises? We're saying either that, for example, the owner was was away in Australia and the caretaker was there meaning to look after the animals and the person wasn't on their own premises. Or basically, if, for example, it was somebody that took the ox to their premises, one of the custodians, because say, for example, he's not a paid custodian or unpaid custodian where he's looking after the ox at the land, at the guard. How do I say this? In other words, guys, say I'm paid as a custodian, I offer to help for you for free. I've got 2 places I can look after the animal. If I'm looking after your place in general, because you're away, I'll be at your place. If I say, listen, give me the cow, etc., or the ox, and I can look after it at my place, I'm going to put it in a special barn, along with my others, and just separate it. Then in that particular case, I'm looking after it on my premises. Okay, but the owner itself is not aware if the custodian is looking after it, if there's going to be a breach on in their ward. So it says in which an animal did damage on their premises. So it could come to include an original person that has to look after their ox. If your ox escaped and broke and went through a wall that was broken at night and when you were sleeping and did havoc, in that particular case, you're not responsible, because if the animal broke open during the night or robbers broke in to come into your place and the animal went out and did damage, you're not liable. Why are you not liable in that particular case? Because you were in a state of unawareness. You were asleep, and this is assuming that the actual wall is in a good state. And then we come to learn in the stuff later that, in fact, we're not talking about the owner himself of the animal. We're talking about what happens if the custodian was given the animal to look after. Is he responsible? So again, what we see, it seems, is that if the animal broke open during the night because the wall enclosed wasn't, it was a secure wall, but it seemed to have collapsed in the middle of the night and you were asleep or it was dark, you're not expected to be responsible even as the guardian. However, and the same if robbers broke in at night, however, during the day and did damage, you are liable. Okay, so it just discusses that in brief. Right, now the Gemara is going to analyze what happens with regards to a borrower. Now, in terms of the brisa that we're going to deal with now, the master said when it does damage, the damage is obligated. When we use the word "it does damage," we're saying when the animal does damage, the damage is obligated. So this comes to include the case of an unpaid custodian, a borrower, a paid custodian, and a renter, in which an animal did damage on their premises. So what are the circumstances in this case? If you wish to say that the brisa speaks of a case in which the lender's ox damaged the borrower's ox, and the brisa teaches that the lender must pay the borrower for the damage, this cannot be. For why should the lender be liable? Do any of you guys want to offer a reason for it? Firstly, do you know the case I'm talking about? Can you give it back to me?
I lost you for a second.
You broke up there for about 15 seconds.
You broke up. You didn't hear you.
Okay.
A minute.
All right. So we're dealing with a case where the ox has been lent or deposited, damaged, an ox belonging to the borrower or custodian or renter. So I'm saying this, is that I lent my ox, Kevin, to you, okay? Why? Because you've got one ox, for example, but you needed 2 ox to pull your plow. This was the days before petrol and diesel and tractors. 1 ox wasn't enough to pull your plow with you sitting on it, because you're obviously directing the ox. You need oxen, plural, in order to plow your field. So you've got an ox, and you said, can you borrow my ox? And I'm lending you my ox, right? And it damaged your ox. Does that make sense, guys? You've got an ox. You needed to borrow my ox. And my ox, as the lender, damaged your ox, and you borrowing the ox. Now you want to basically say that I'm responsible for damaging your good ox. Why can this not be?
Can I answer?
Yeah, but just bear in mind it happens on the borrower's premises. It happened in Kevin's premises, meaning Kevin needed to borrow my ox. He's got 1 ox, a second, my ox damaged his ox, and he wants money back. You can answer with pleasure.
So it's responsibility of the guy who lent the ox. That's Kevin. Kevin borrowed the ox from the lender, and now he has to take responsibility. If that ox does any damage to any property or to another ox, he's responsible because he's borrowing that ox. He's utilizing it. Now, if it damages his own ox, then it's basically, it cancels itself out. because he's responsible for that borrowed ox damaging his own ox. So the lender is not responsible at all.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm not sure. I tried.
Sorry, Damon, sorry.
James?
Maybe because when your ox damaged my ox, it was in my possession. I was actually became the temporary owner, so maybe you're not liable.
James,
Okay.
can I give it a shot?
Sure.
Okay, so for example, let's say the ox gets out, right? The reason why you're responsible for actually damaging your own ox, because the lender, the guy who was responsible for the ox, for lending it, at least should be responsible for not damaging your own oxen. Somebody else's oxen he's exempt from, but your own oxen, at least he should be exempt from that. I mean, you should be responsible for that.
Okay.
In your own field. In your own field, I'm talking about. If it got out of your own field, it attacked. What I'm trying to say is, if it attacked, I'm just thinking what I heard earlier, but if it got out through the wall, okay, and it got into a field, and it attacked a strange oxen, okay, fine, you exempt from that. But if it attacked your own oxen, you should be, and it was during the day, you should be at least responsible for it. You should have gone after it and stopped from attacking your own oxen. At least that's the response. That's what I think. What I read up earlier.
So, Arth, unfortunately, in this case, you're not right. And I'll explain to you why, and Kevin isn't right in this case. But the fact of it is, I'm pleased that each of you took a stab at it, because it's worthwhile thrashing this issue through. So the fact of it is this: I'm borrowing an ox. Okay. We learned that there were 4 different responsibilities. Now, what happens is, if you're doing me a favor by lending me the ox and you're not gaining anything, I have higher level of responsibility. The ox could get stuck by lightning and I'd have to replace it. If that ox did any damage to anybody else, Arthur, you wouldn't want to know. You'd say, buddy, it's in your care. If it created havoc, you pick up the bill. If my ox disappeared, got hit by lightning or whatever, I'm not charging you for it. I'm doing you this favor. Just bring it back in a decent state. And if there's havoc that's caused, the standard agreement is the borrower picks up all the responsibility. Okay? It's the only responsibility that the borrower generally doesn't pick up is if the animal died in its normal use. So it's equivalent to borrowing a car, and the car, you borrowed it for one day, and the head gasket blew. Now, clearly that's not your fault if you weren't flooring the car and abusing the car. Okay. That was long-term damage waiting to happen. So therefore, the borrower is exempt in that case. Gavin said it incorrectly. I'm going to get to your issue, Arth, but your issue is a little bit more complicated, but it's not accurately given over. You didn't actually.
I think I got it from, because I've been doing 14A and 1 and 2.
No, I understand, but to clarify, so I know you've done your revision, but it wasn't accurately given over. Not your fault, but at least you did the revision. All right. So this is the case. So I'm saying to Kevin, okay, because I lent the ox to Kevin. I said, if my ox, Kevin, had damaged somebody else's ox while in your care, you would have had to pay for that damage. Now that my ox damaged your ox, why should I have to pay for it? In other words, you borrowing my ox, Kev, and because you're borrowing my ox, you must know, as the borrower, you've got the least amount of rights because I'm doing you the most favor. It's different in a case of an unpaid custodian because you're the one that needs my ox. If Gavin, for example, is an unpaid custodian, I'm the one that's going overseas and say, I want you to look after my stuff. Gavin's doing me the favor. Here you're saying, listen, I'm one ox short to plow my field. You're doing me a favor, borrow the ox. So the more of a favor I'm doing you, the more responsibility you have to assume. That's how it works. Does that make sense? And if you're paying me to look after your animal, there's a different set of responsibilities. we're going to go through it. But I mean, we have gone through it already. But we're talking in the case of a borrower. So if Kevin borrows my ox because he needs two oxen to plow, and my ox smashes his ox, I'd say, but Kevin, you should have been watching what you borrowed, because you took on responsibility of my ox. The standard protocol is, if the ox that you borrowed did damage to anybody, you have to pay. If anybody damaged my ox, again, you have to pay. So what I'm saying is, it brought in the previous duff that had it occurred during the day where there was a damage in the wall and you could see it, and my ox came out on Louis Buerta Avenue and started smashing cars and chasing people, whatever, it's the responsibility of the person that borrowed the ox, because he should have been awake and not let the ox run rogue. I don't want to start to get bills and cops coming to my house or whatever. I gave it to Kevin to look after because Kevin borrowed the ox. So I would say to you, Kevin, I'm the I lent you the ox. I'm the lender, and I'd say to you as the borrower, if my ox had damaged somebody else's ox while in your care, you, the borrower, would have to pay for that damage. Now suddenly when my ox damages your ox, why should I have to pay for it? Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions?
Definitely. No, I agree.
Kev, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay, now it's obviously doing damage on your premises because you borrowed the ox from me. So I don't know what's going on. You suddenly approaching me. So the Gemara is saying, okay, maybe you want to say the other way around, in that the borrower's ox damaged the lender's ox. So I'm lending an ox to Kevin. Now Kevin's ox takes one look at my ox and doesn't dig it. And all of a sudden, it digs it with its horns. So in other words, Kevin, your ox, which you own, attacks my ox, which you borrowed, and does damage. Okay? Now you want to come to me and you want to say to me, listen, it's the first, I'm very sorry, Day. It's the first time my ox has done this. I need, it's not more than 3 times. I need to pay you half damages. And I'm going to turn around to you, Kevin, and say, nothing doing. That's not fair. And I'll tell you why it's not fair. Because if my ox had been damaged by another ox while it was in your care, you would have had to have paid for the entire ox, whether it was damaged by a tam or a muad ox. Now that your ox is tam, you're going to pay me half damages. Doesn't make sense. Kev, do you understand this or not? If you don't, ask with pleasure. I can explain it in a different way.
It only pay full damages if it becomes a muad.
No, not if you're borrowing it. So let me give you an example.
Oh, borrowing, okay.
Yeah, so in other words, I'm lending you my article. And guys, this is pretty... a borrower must pay the lender for the loss of the borrowed item, even though it was lost through an unavoidable accident. Could be struck by lightning or whatever. Again, you've borrowed my laptop. Okay? You borrowed my laptop. It doesn't matter if, for example, another ox knocks into my laptop that I lent you, and that ox is a first-time offense and you want to pay half damages for the damage to my laptop. I'd say to you, Kevin, I'm not interested in what happened. You took on the responsibility of borrowing my laptop or my ox or whatever the case may be. You got to replace it. That's the nature of what happens. And therefore, you can't turn around and say, well, it's suddenly your ox. Guys, just let me finish a sec. It's suddenly your ox, and therefore you want to pay half damages because it's done it less than 3 times. I can turn around to you and say, listen, if somebody else's ox damaged my ox while in your care, you would have had to make good the rest of the loss out of your own pocket. So in other words, there's a third party, and my ox is in your care, it borrowed it. And a foreign ox went into your field and smashed my ox. But that ox was tam. So that person pays you the half damages from the gufa of the animal tam. But I'm not interested because I lent you the article or the ox, and I'm expecting you to replace what you've damaged. That's your responsibility. Does that make sense? Guys, can you...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So by default, so tam never applies if you're borrowing something.
No. And in fact, we learned the different sort of custodians that if it did damage, it's not just for the borrower. We're using an example of a borrower here because a borrower is the most stringent. In other words, even if it got hit by lightning, you'd have to replace it. It doesn't make a difference. Where the person's looking after your thing and does a favor for you, there are different sort of leniencies. So we can go through that again. That's not the end of the world. But the point of it is for the borrower that you can assume the most extreme. And this is on Bava Kamma 44b, that I'm not interested in you paying me half damage because it was your ox that was tam. If another ox was tam, damaged my ox, you'd have to make up the shortfall. I just want my object replaced. So the Gemara...
So if it hits another animal that's tam, he has to make up the shortfall as well. So a borrower has to give back exactly what he took.
Yes, that's exactly it. So the borrower, Kevin, you might get the tam damages from another person, but you have to make up the shortfall. Because again, if I lent you my laptop, I wouldn't care if you got half payment back for the laptop damages. I would want my laptop back. That's all I'm interested in. Okay. All right. Guys, let me just carry on quickly.
No, it's clear now to me, anyway.
So the Bryce so now what we say is, the Gemara answers, in fact, the Bryce is speaking of a case in which the lender's ox damaged the borrower's ox, okay? But what case are we dealing with here? You've got to pay attention here. This is very important. My ox damaged, I'm lending an ox to Kevin and it damaged Kevin's ox. Now, the normal arrangement is it's Kevin's responsibility because as a borrower, he has to make sure my property that he borrows, because he's deriving full benefit, doesn't damage anybody else's property, including his own. He's watching it. He's a shomer. He's a guardian. He might be a borrower, but he has to look after it. So we're dealing with the case here where the borrower accepted upon himself the responsibility of guarding the ox's body against damage, but, and this is where you've got to carefully note, he did not accept upon himself the responsibility of guarding the ox against doing damage to others. Therefore, if the borrower's ox damaged the borrowed ox, the lender is liable. I'll explain it. Guys, can you go on mute? One of your marks is playing up. Could be mine. I don't know. Okay. So, what I'm saying is as follows, is that we learn here something very interesting, that although you have the four types of custodian and different rules of obligations applied to each custodian, you can make a separate contract with the person. So Kevin can turn around to me and say, Damon, I need to borrow your ox, and I will protect your ox against any damage that is caused to it, and I'll replace it. But I don't know the nature of your ox. Maybe your ox is crazy. Maybe your ox is twitchy. I'm not going to assume responsibility if your ox damages anybody else's ox. Okay? Now, I've got a choice as the lender. I can say, Kevin, then don't borrow my ox. Or I can say, listen, okay, I get it. That's fine. But then I'd have to draft a contract to state that, because the default position is the civil law states that Kevin, as the borrower, is responsible for everything. And you can do a custom contract, we're learning here, where if both the lender and the borrower is happy, that Kevin can assume responsibility for my ox being damaged, lending it to him, but he won't accept responsibility for my ox doing the damage because he doesn't know the nature of my ox. But I have to agree to it. Does that make sense? Now, there's certain laws that two parties have cannot supersede civil law. I'll give you a perfect case. What's the case? In laws with labor law. Because you can't enter into agreement with somebody that's financially desperate and pay them less than minimum wage in the country where the person agrees because they're desperate. Because then obviously nobody's going to adhere to the civil law. So there has to be a minimum baseline to which you pay somebody, and your private contract with them is overridden by civil law in that case. Why? Because everybody's entitled to a fair minimum wage. Does that make sense? Okay, just nod if it makes sense. You're on mute. Okay, excellent. So what we're doing here is we're saying that if the special arrangement took hold, Kevin doesn't have to suck up the fact that my ox damaged his ox, because I said that if my ox damaged anybody else's ox, including Kevin's, then I'm responsible. But that's a special arrangement. Okay, so I just want to finish off on one note, and then we're done, and we at the moment on 14A1. So fine. So the Gemara challenges this explanation of the Brisa. If so, the Brisa speaks of a case in which the borrower did not accept responsibility for preventing the ox from damaging other animals. Then consider the latter ruling of the Brisa. The wall enclosed by the animal broke open during the night, or robbers broke it open, and the animal went out and did damage, is exempt. So this actually implies that if this occurred during the day, the borrower would be liable. So why, according to the explanation of the custom contract, should he be liable when he did not accept himself the responsibility of guarding the ox against doing damage? So the Gemara answers, so this is what the latter Brisa is saying, that if there was a special arrangement where the borrower didn't accept responsibility of guarding the animal, even if it went out in the day and caused havoc, the owner, the lender, is responsible. But if he did accept the responsibility of guarding the animal against doing damage, he is responsible if the wall damaged during the day. But if it broke, the wall broke during the night, or robbers came in, he's not so responsible at night because it's dark, he was sleeping, you can't see, etc. And that's what it's coming to clarify. All right, guys, I want to thank you very much. We've got 1 minute and 52 seconds. Just one question. Simcha Steinhauer said that we have to learn something specific for a person's neshama, not our standard learning, if we're dedicating it to their neshama. Has anybody got anything to teach in the next minute or so? For Jack. You have to. All right, I can teach you something. I can teach you something that we learned from Rav Simcha. So if you're doing a dedication, what you should preferably do, according to Rabbi Foifer, is that you need to learn something you wouldn't have learned in order for it to have extra merit for their neshama. Because if you're doing your standard learning, that person's dedication hasn't really, according to Rabbi Foifer, changed anything in your standard learning. You have to do special learning dedicated to that person in order for it to invoke an effect. That's Rav Simcha quoting the late Rabbi Foifer. So we learned this in Jack's merit. So this is something I'm teaching you from Rav Simcha Steinhauer.
Yeah, no, it's good to know.
All right, guys, have a wonderful day, and I'm really sorry about what happened with Jack. Honestly, I can't.